Tonight, Dr. Plague reads A Helping Hand. Enjoy. I've been a lawyer for nearly a decade, but this was a new one even for me. Faustus Manx had the unfortunate luck of having parents who were both literary majors, making his full name Faustus Dominus Manx, and having absolutely no interest in matters academic. He was a large man, covered in gang tattoos, with a disposition for theft that had started young. He was guilty of home invasion, breaking and entering, mugging, carjacking, and finally, bank robbery. He had been given 25 years after a string of robberies with his little crew. The last time I had seen him, he had been led from the courthouse after I had talked the court out of a life sentence in prison. His parents' money had been well spent, I supposed. When he had called me out of the blue, after a year of no contact, I thought it must be a mistake. That was, until I agreed to see him and saw the state of him. I had seen him in the medical area, client-lawyer privilege getting me that far at least. He was cuffed to a table by the waist, since his current situation made it difficult to hook him at the wrists. He was a mess. He had lost 20 pounds, his face was gaunt, his beard was tangled and scratchy looking. He had always been boyish and lean when I'd seen him in court, the picture of youth and vitality, but now he seemed to have aged 20 years. The last time I had seen him, he had also had both his hands. Faustus, you look like crap if I'm being honest. He had sneered at that. I need your help, Prof. Someone hurt me bad. I need you to go get them. They can't do this to me. They can't do this to me and get away with it. He held up his stump as he yelled, and I saw the guards tensing. Shook my head at them. Calm down, Faustus. Tell me what's happened. I'll see if I can make a case. Calm down? Prof, a son of a bitch took my hand. He called me Prof because I had worked at the college with his parents as a law professor before going back to practice again. He had met me at a very young age, and I guess the name had stuck. I put a hand up to calm him, the guards getting antsy again. I wanted to hear about the removal of his hand, though. It was very draconian, after all, the removal of a thief's hand. I want to help, but I need to know what happened. Start from the beginning, and I'll tell you if there's a case to be had. Faustus sighed and began to speak. I'm a thief, you know. I can't say it's because I needed money or anything. It's just because I like to steal. I love taking things. It makes me feel powerful. It makes me feel in control. I ain't smart like you, like my parents. But when I'm stealing, man, I'm in control. No one can stop me. I was a great thief. It took one of my own guys snitching on me for them to catch me. At the end of it, I guess that's why I'm in this place, in this situation. I was convicted and sentenced to 25 years. I would have probably gotten life if it hadn't been for you, Prof. I was placed in close management dorm, a place that houses dangerous inmates like myself. It's not really so different from the rest of the prison. You go to the yard twice a week, you eat in the chow hall 3 times a day, you watch TV, you have inspection, and you sleep in your bunk every night. That was where I met Fox. That's what everyone called him, at least, and he was in there for life. We became friends on the first day. Fox approached me in the chow hall with a couple of his boys around him. Said he knew me, said he'd been following my spree on the news, said he would love to hear all about it. Well, I like to talk about myself, you know that. So I told him. We went to meals and evenings and walks around the track and discussing my crimes and my luck. I insisted that it was planning, He insisted that it must have been luck that had carried me all this way. He said it so often that, hell, I even started to believe it. He brought me into his little gang, and there I lived very comfortably for a while. We talked a lot. He even pulled some strings and became my roommate, and we often sat up late, talking about the actions that had brought us here. I didn't know what exactly I was getting involved with, but I guess I learned. You see, Prof, while I was a thief, Fox, he was a monster. He had killed people, his old business partner's family to be exact. However, his one big regret seemed to be that he had never gotten his business partner too. He told me he was a former thief too, though his crimes were white collar. To hear him tell it, I was selling myself short. While I was robbing banks and making 5 or 6 G's, this guy was pulling down 500 or 600 G's a year. I was always very careful where I skimmed. 1,000 here, 5,000 there, and no one ever really suspected. The company I had founded made millions of dollars a quarter. They never missed what I took. Then one day, my business partner called me up and told me to come to lunch. He took me to the most expensive restaurant in town, and after cocktails and steaks, he told me that he knew about the skimming and made an ultimatum. He would allow me to stay out of jail and even keep the money I had stolen. In exchange, he would be the sole owner of the company. In exchange for my shares, I could keep my freedom. What was I supposed to do exactly? He had asked me this while playing chess, a game he was amazing at, and I didn't know how to answer. The answer, it seemed, was to burn his partner's house down. Not right away, of course. I was still afraid that he would rat me out, and I would be taken to prison. I stayed in the shadows, trying to make the money I had stolen last even, worrying that any day the police would come knocking. I had stolen hundreds of thousands, but I had chewed through a lot of it already. I'd bought expensive cars and treated people to lavish meals, and now I was regretting my decisions. I still had enough money to live for a while, not to my usual level of opulence, but well enough. That was until I saw that our company had sold. I was just watching TV one day, eating lunch, when I saw him mounting a podium to give a press conference. It was, with a heavy heart, he said, that he must announce his sale of our company. He was stepping down as CEO and would be leaving the company in the hands of the new owners. When they announced how much he had sold the company for, I felt the bowl slide out of my hand. He had cheated me. He had seen an opportunity and took everything from me. At that moment, nothing mattered. At that moment, I wanted revenge. And the rest was history. He had killed his ex-business partner's wife, son, and daughter in that fire, but had failed to kill the man he meant to kill. Then he tried to kill him again while he was in the courtroom, earning himself a life sentence. It appeared the only thing he had done right was to set up a fund to put money in his account while he was in here. Fox had cash, lots of cash, and he was pretty free with it. The fund he had set up was not technically connected to him, so the reparations could not be taken out of it to pay for his crimes as he rotted in prison, you see. It will buy me food and help insulate me from undesirables for the next 5 to 8 years, he had told me once. I asked him what he would do after that, and he just laughed. Very soon, I don't think I'll have this problem anymore. I asked him what he meant, but for a while, he wouldn't tell me. He just kept smirking at me, sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. He was weird, Fox, and I was almost glued to his hip from day one. He and his boys didn't seem to want me to be far from him, and I was fine with that. I got protection, a share of his food stores, enjoyed the perks of knowing him. Guards treated him differently, murder or not, and he told me secretly that many of them were on his payroll. He had inmates in his employ, guards in his employ, and life was good under his wing. Then, one morning, he came to me and told me that tomorrow night was the night his plans would go down. I asked him what he meant, but he only winked and said he would call for me when the time was right. Then he disappeared near the start of the day, even before breakfast, and didn't come back for the rest of the night. I was getting worried. He'd never been gone this long. I lay down, and I was beginning to think that maybe his plan had included getting out. I was kind of mad. I knew his bruisers were probably mad too. Why not let the rest of us in on the plan so we could leave after he got out? Surely he wasn't going through the woods. They said that place was haunted, and as I fell asleep, my dreams were plagued with images of my new friend running through the dark forest as he fled from ghosts or ghouls or something. Looking back, I can't believe I ever worried about that guy. I checked my watch and sighed as Faustus rambled on. Faustus, not that this isn't riveting, but is there a point? He looked affronted. Yeah, there is. Of course there is. If you'll shut the hell up and let me finish. You want to know how I lost my freaking hand, don't you? I waved for him to continue, and unfortunately, he obliged. A guard came for me at 11 o'clock. He told me to get dressed and not ask a lot of questions. He cuffed me in the front, for appearances, he said, and led me from my cell across the yard. We went to the kitchens, somewhere I knew of but had never actually been to. He let me in, still in cuffs, and opened the door for me as the dark guts of the place stood open. I looked inside and wasn't real sure I wanted to go in there. Who's in there? I asked. You know who's in there. Get the hell in there before someone sees you, he growled. I took a step forward then, but turned to ask if he was going to take my cuffs off or what. When he pushed me in with his foot, I was so surprised that I fell face first into the kitchen. As the door was locked behind me, I turned my head, but he was already walking away as I started yelling. I wanted to know what the hell this was about. And when firm hands grabbed me into the arms and pulled me to my feet, I fought a little before I realized it was just the bruisers that Fox usually used. They got me back on my feet, and one of them told me to follow as they took me into the kitchen so I could see Fox. Fox was near the stoves, stirring a pot, and the contents were boiling hot. It looked like soup. It was bubbling kind of thick. I made some joke about having a midnight snack. He looked at me, and he smiled with his mouth, but I was very aware that it never went to his eyes. His eyes were like ball bearings, steely and icy, and I wondered how often he had looked at me like that, and I just hadn't noticed. A snack? Oh no, Faust. This is tallow, candle wax. You wouldn't believe how hard it was to get this in here. I had to pay someone quite a lot of money for this. But it is the end of a long plan to escape. Tonight, I will walk from Stragview a free man, and it's all thanks to you and this pot of wax. I looked at him in surprise. Had he cracked? How was this pot of wax, and me, of course, gonna help him get out? I asked him if this was a joke or something, but I suddenly noticed that the two brutes had taken hold of my arms, and I started to understand the seriousness of this. Faust, have you ever heard of a hand of glory? I shook my head, but I was more interested in what I had suddenly noticed in his other hand. How had I missed that before? It had been hanging at his side, lost in the shadow of the dark kitchen as he stirred the pot. When he turned to look at me, though, I could see it glimmer in the slight light of the safety lights. All the tools were supposed to be locked in the tool cage. Everyone knew that. The knives were locked in a cage within a cage, just for extra safety. The butcher's knife he held was doubly impressive then, for that very reason. In the Middle Ages, he said, slapping the flat of the blade against his hand, people would take the hands of a dead thief and dip it in tallow and use it in their nefarious plans. The hand was supposed to have a multitude of powers, providing lights, making people invisible, unlocking doors, etc. I noticed, however, that it was always the hand of a dead thief. No one ever tried it with a living thief's hand, and I wonder if maybe that might make it even more powerful. Tonight, Faustus, I intend to find out. moment. He checked the pot. Tallow's ready. It's just about midnight, too. Dip him, boys. I started struggling, his words finally sinking in. In this scenario, I was the thief, and he was going to take my hand. I struggled against the bruisers, but I might as well have been a toddler fighting against grown men. Fox took the pot off the stove, the knife laying on the lip now. The flames licked at the blade, getting it hot, red hot. That's when I realized it would be for what came next. They put me on my knees, looking down into that soupy mess as my hands were extended towards it. I held my arms against me defensively, yelling for help, screaming for anyone. Fox just went on smiling as he forced my arms out front. I resisted, of course I did, but when he whispered in my ear, I felt some of my resistance melt away. I only need one hand, Faust, but if you keep fighting, I can just as easily make it two. Call me a coward, but the idea of living with no hands made me rethink my struggling. I immediately regretted it once my hands hit that wax. You see, he may have only needed one hand, but the way I was cuffed, both of them were going in the pot. The contents were boiling. The tallow was like liquid tar. I screamed and bucked as it hardened around them. They held my hands in that tallow for nearly 5 minutes, the skin scorching and searing as it was treated to a blazing bath. When they pulled them free, I was gasping and swearing, promising 1,000 terrible acts of revenge. As the wax hardened around my hands, I wanted to move them, to break the wax and ruin it, but I realized that they just dipped them again, and I tried to keep them still. It wasn't like I could have moved them anyway. My hands were burnt. The skin was blistered raw. I had lost feeling in them for the moment. Well, not all the feeling. I would learn that pretty quickly. They heaved me up, laying my arms across the butcher's table. As Fox spoke some words and readied his knife, he checked his watch, looked down at me one last time. His eyes were cruel, but he was smiling. His goal was in sight. I had seen this man look at people like that from time to time in the last few months. It was not a look I wanted aimed at me. It was the look that said he was about to take something from you, that you had something he wanted. It was a look a toddler gives another toddler before he snatches his toy and pushes him down. Stay absolutely still if you want to keep the other hand, Faust. My aim is good, but I can't be held responsible if you jerk at the last minute, and I take both. He held the knife up high, waiting, and as my watch chimed midnight, he brought it down. My left hand wasn't as dead as I thought it was. I screamed as it came off, the blade biting easily through the wrist. A gout of blood surged out, and the cuffs slipped off as I writhed in pain. The hand sat dumbly on the table, no longer anything more than a totem for this crazy supplicant. But I fancied that I could feel it throbbing, longing to clench in pain. They dragged me over to the stove, and a new pain washed over me. They cauterized my wound with a stove burner, and then left me on the floor as Fox took my hand. Thank you, Faust. Thank you for your contribution to my revenge. I'll be sure to think about you while I'm choking the life out of that son of a bitch partner of mine. Then, he and his flunkies just walked out of the kitchen, out of living memory, forever. I blinked at Faust. What do you mean, out of living memory? Surely they recaptured this man. He was walking around with a human hand, for God's sake. Faustus sat back, crossing his arms, and I could see that the burn scars on his other hand were severe. Nope, he and his flunkies disappeared into the night. They caught those two last week. They were robbing a gas station. Idiots. But Fox, he's still at large. I tried to make sense of this, but my attention was drawn back to Faustus as he leaned over the table and looked at me in his strange, too knowing way. What's more is that I remember the two bruisers, Horace and Avery, but Fox, what about him? You've been talking about him for the past hour. That's just it, Prof. I've been telling you his name this whole time, but I'm betting you couldn't remember it, could you? I shook my head, confused. No, you just called him Fox the whole time. Faustus looked at me and grinned. Nope, that's just what you've been hearing. That's what everybody hears. There is no inmate Fox, and the name I use cannot be heard, cannot be known. Then how do you know it? I asked, thinking I had stumped him. Beats me. Probably because he's using my hand or something. Whatever it is, I remember him, and no one else does. I scoffed loudly, frustrated, unsure what game he was playing. Then why tell me at all? Because, just because you can't find him, doesn't mean you can't find his crimes. He's gonna kill his business partner, the ex-owner of some big company. The company sold within the last 5 years and made a lot of money. The guy's family died 3 years ago in a fire that this guy started. If you can find him before Fox does, then maybe you can help him. I don't care about this guy. He's nothing to me. But I want someone to catch Fox. Motherfucker's got my hand. I want someone to take his life. That was hours ago. I'm now sitting in my study, sifting through hundreds of Google search results from the state of Georgia, looking for rich men who've lost their families to what is now probably a mysterious fire or have died recently from mysterious causes. If anyone can help me, I don't know if I'd tell you to look into it or not. Ever since I left the prison, I've been noticing a strange shape in the corner of my eye. It hides. It creeps. The idea of someone who can move without consequences is starting to seem much less far-fetched. If you find the man, warn him. If you don't, then forget you ever read this story, lest you find Fox's eyes on you as well. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for my Sunday reading. Time to thank our patrons again. Thanks again to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to hear your name read at the end of every episode, come on down to Patreon and be a member of our Spooky Skeleton tier. Or even, if you are also a reader of the spooky stories, you can become one of our ghostwriters at our ghostwriter tier. If you love my stories, but you're tired of paying that pesky $5 reader's fee, maybe it's time to become our ghostwriter contributor and read all the stories you want for just $10 a month. Doesn't that sound great? Sounds pretty great to me. And as always, thanks for joining us tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.